Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Vicki Fishman. She is the Director of Government and Community Relations for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. Thank you so much for being here, Vicki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So the JCRC, as it's known, which is much shorter than its longer title, held a legislative breakfast last week, and I was fortunate enough to be invited in my new capacity. And I was absolutely astonished and impressed, not only with the turnout of all the people in the room, but your legislative agenda, the speakers that you had, and how well you spoke, the JCRC spoke, about what you do in the community and your long-term missions, which are, yes, about supporting the values of the Jewish community, but it's so much more inclusive than that. And some of the issues that you covered, I was like, this is amazing. So this was kind of my first interaction with the JCRC. And so I'm like, come on the show, because if I don't know it, there's probably lots of people who don't know it. And so this is a really great opportunity for you to help our viewers understand what the JCRC is, what you do, who your members are, who your constituents are. So let's start back at the beginning, which is, how did this organization come together?
So we've been around for a long time. Let me just add to one of the things that you said. We had two legislative breakfasts last week. We had one in Virginia and one in Maryland.
I was in the Virginia one.
You were in the Virginia one. So we are the public affairs arm of the organized Jewish community of the Greater Washington area. We represent about 100 or more agencies, synagogues, day schools, JCCs, social service agencies. And we've been around for, I think you said it early, right, 1938. So we've been around for a long time. Obviously, our mission has changed as the world around us has changed. But generally speaking, we represent the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community. We support Jewish life, which includes combating antisemitism, but it also supports, it also includes
things like immigration, affordable housing. I mean, the list is really long of what you're advocating for. That is everything our communities care about. Everybody in our communities care about.
Exactly. So it's enacting, it's allowing our Jewish community to live Jewishly and support the world, the communities that they exist in.
So a little bit about your background. So you're an attorney by training.
I am.
How did you come to do this particular kind of work?
So I actually went to law school after doing a job very similar to this at an organization called American Jewish Congress. And went to law school realizing that so much of this social justice work is embedded in the law. When I graduated law school, I first practiced as a litigator and worked as an estate planner for a while, but continued to do this kind of work on the side in my volunteer capacity. My kids are a bit older now, so as I was looking for, what will I do when I have a little bit more time and a little more emotional energy, this job was available, and so looked into it and combined my hats. So I'm now doing what I was doing as a volunteer, I'm now doing as a career, and it's really an honor to be able to do this kind of work.
So a lot of this really is relationship building. I mean, I really got that sense at the Virginia breakfast.
Yep.
You had a room full of legislators there.
Yep.
You had amazing speakers, including the wonderful Phyllis Randall.
She was fabulous. She brought us to our feet.
She did. And part of that was her addressing the anti-Semitism that exists here in Northern Virginia.
Yep.
The graffiti, the vandalism, the hate speech, the threats, it's become more intense.
Absolutely.
And it seems like it's getting more intense for it to be in Loudoun County.
Yep.
So what she had to say to us was really important that morning, and I think that's why the room responded. Talk a little bit about what the JCRC is trying to do in this environment of dialed up hate speech.
Yeah, so we address it on multiple levels. We are seeing it just in the last few weeks, actually, in Loudoun County. We've seen a real uptick in the schools in particular. We've also seen a lot of anti-Semitism in the schools in Fairfax County. And we address it on all levels. We have addressed it, we talked a lot before the show about the calendar.
Right.
One of the ways in which having an inclusive calendar fights anti-Semitism is that it builds understanding of the community and the different parts of the community. The calendar really reflects the values of a community as well as what the community looks like. And so having an inclusive calendar, which Fairfax County has for the first time this year, really helps Jewish students feel seen and heard, and that's happening all around Northern Virginia this year for the first time, which is wonderful. So that's sort of on the proactive end. On the end of when things happen, we have close relationships, as you said. It's all about relationships. We have relationships with school principals, we have relationships with the school board, with the equity staff in the county as a whole, and depending on what the incident is, we work those channels. We help families respond. And if they need us to help the intervention, we reach out to the principals ourselves. We reach out to the equity officers to try to get a solution to the problem. Another sort of half proactive and half defensive thing that we do, we have a wonderful program for teens called Student to Student, where we train, I think this year we have about 90 students, teenagers around the area, who work in teams, and they go and they present in the public schools. And they might do it when an incident has happened as sort of a response. They might do it in a classroom that's studying comparative religions or about to enter a unit on the Holocaust, to introduce to those students what does an actual Jewish teenager look like today. And so it'd be a group of 4 teenagers going and talking about what is it like to live Jewishly? What is it like to live with the memory of the Holocaust? What is it like to have a connection to Israel? 80% of American Jews, I said 80, but it's somewhere 80 plus. It's a vast majority of American Jews say that a connection to Israel is quintessential to their Jewish identity. And so the teens talk about that. And for many students listening, it's the first time they're hearing that. And for our kids, it's their first time being able to explain that to somebody who's not Jewish, and what does that mean? And how do those kids experience anti-Semitism in their own lives? So it creates that connection with their peers where they can talk openly about who they are and introduce themselves in that way. So that's another way that we kind of proactively address anti-Semitism, and in the defensively, it's something we can bring in when something has happened to try to create some understanding.
You bring up something interesting. There's the practice of a religion, and then there's sort of the rituals and ceremonies that go with it. Mm-hmm. And I can remember my husband Tom talking about attending his first bar mitzvah in Dalton, Georgia, mm-hmm. in the 1960s. Yep. Right? And there really weren't Jewish families or a Jewish community in Dalton, Georgia. And he was just a good old Southern Baptist. Mm-hmm. But he went to his friend's bar mitzvah, and it was just like so eye-opening for him. Yeah. And I think it's for quinceañera, if you look at other communities and cultures, there are these ceremonies mm-hmm. that the rest of us don't understand if you've never been exposed. And right. I think the thing about Fairfax County and Northern Virginia writ large is we are so multicultural, yeah. not to include young people, students, children, understanding the customs and the culture mm-hmm. of other people. And again, some of that is based in religion and some of that is cultural, and there's right. a huge crossover there.
Right, absolutely. And actually the same group, the student-to-student group, to further what you're saying, they also participate in interfaith conversations. So they have programming with an LDS youth group or a Sikh community center, a Muslim group. So those get set up throughout the year where they get to just introduce each other to their lives, their religious lives, their ethnic lives, and get to compare notes and ask tough questions of each other, and sort of hear the variety of answers. Certainly within the Jewish community, one thing we make sure is that we are representative of our community, which means Reform Jews, Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, unaffiliated Jews, and each kid and each person really, there are certain core values, but how that plays out in their lives can be very different.
And you bring up something important. It's not monolithic. Mm-hmm. How people practice Judaism is varied, and you just mentioned them. Yep. And I think those nuances are important too.
Right, and as an organization, we represent sort of an umbrella which means that there's not, we are always kind of living in nuance, trying to represent our values and implementing them in a way that really represents all of our community, and I purposely say all of our organized community, because it really is the agencies, the rabbis and the synagogues, the Jewish Community Center, the day school, the social service agencies like Jewish Social Service Agency, a Jewish Council for the Aging, Jewish Coalition Against Domestic Abuse. These are all agencies that are Jewish organizations that provide services to the whole community.
Right.
But they are founded by people in the Jewish community and based on Jewish values. And our role is really to represent all of those in the government and civic sphere.
Right, and like the Jewish Community Center that's here in Northern Virginia, which is right outside the borders of Fairfax City, has a tremendous number of programs, and because I work with Cameron's Coffee and Chocolates, which is in the city, they have programs for children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And they are just, that is so important. It is so important to that community to have those programs, and even though it's the Jewish Community Center that's kind of running them and putting the program together, it is meant for everyone.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned Cameron. So Cameron was part of a program through what's now called Macomb, used to be the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes. They have a program that's been in Fairfax County for a very long time, helping young adults transition from the public school system to independence. Loudoun County had actually been asking JFGH to bring that program out to Loudoun County. So we were able to be the go-between between JFGH, Loudoun County, and the state legislature to create a piece in the budget where Loudoun County and Macomb could get a little bit of state support to help bring that program out to Loudoun County. And it's now been out in Loudoun County for 3 or 4 years. And so that's like exactly the role that we do. Right, exactly. It's sort of bringing those pieces together because of the relationships that we have, because we know what's needed and we know sort of who we can connect with whom.
And that's the important thing, is putting resources in a targeted way in programs that work. And so I think a lot of people who don't understand how the sausage gets made between public policy, programming, the delivery of service, where are the resources, where are the people, and how is it funded? And it is kind of complicated to figure that out.
Yeah.
So we are going to go to a short break. We are talking with Vicki Fishman. She is with the JCRC, which is the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. And we are going to learn more about what this organization is doing and what they intend to do as we move forward into our legislative session. Join us after the break.
I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead.
I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry. Let's go.
Yeah. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we are talking with Vicki Fishman. She is the Director of Government and Community Relations for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, D.C., known as the JCRC. I'm just going to call it the JCRC because between your title and the organization, it's like, so it's Vicki with the JCRC. So one of the things that has really come up very recently is the governor's administration pushing for a retooling of the history curriculum for Virginia schools. So the Humke Center, and I know JCRC and a lot of other organizations really pushed back hard when they were about to roll those out. The changes, the wholesale changes that were made in a matter of months on a project that had been years in the making for the curriculum. And so the Humke Center was talking about the fact that, you know, the teaching of Asian American history is weak. The teaching of indigenous history is weak. The teaching of enslaved peoples, very weak.
Yep.
And so moving forward, helping children to understand cross-culturally all of the people that make up our history today and in the past. Clearly, the Jewish community has been here from day one.
Right.
And so trying to make a space in Virginia public school education for a more complete telling of history is something that has brought a coalition of many organizations together. So talk a little bit about how that is moving forward.
So we've been involved in it for the 2-year process that's been going on and giving testimony and providing input. And like the rest of the work we do, you know, our immediate focus and where we're the experts is on issues related specifically to the Jewish community. Jewish history from the beginning of Judaism and then the Holocaust and everything in between and Jewish American history since. But also more broadly, just to make sure that there is that all histories are being taught accurately. And now the process, you know, was rolled out and is going back, and so we do have confidence that the process is going to continue to work and go forward, and bring back in a lot of the good work that was done. So it's still a process, and I've been told that I can be overly optimistic, but I am, I am optimistic.
You have to be hopeful, because what is there if you're not hopeful anyway?
And I think there are good people involved who really want to get it right. And so I think that work is ongoing. One thing that I think I want to point out though is, you know, we talk about these in these sort of global isms. And you know, one of the things that shocked me when we were first giving the commentary was when you get to the nuts and bolts, it doesn't necessarily make the headlines, but it's really the nuts and bolts of the curriculum that have the impact. And like one of the just clearest examples that shouldn't be offensive, I don't think, to anybody, where we gave commentary was in describing world religions. There was a description of Christianity is, and then a sentence about what Christianity is, Islam is, and then a sentence about what Islam was, and then Judaism is the precursor to Christianity and Islam. It was, and that's what's in place right now. And so it was that kind of like small detail, or not so small detail, but let me just say detail, that was really important for us to give commentary on, that really what our history curriculum needs to be explaining is what Judaism is, not what Judaism foretold.
Yeah, foretold.
Right? And so, you know, there's so much in the political sphere talking about education, but when it gets down to the nuts and bolts, you know, that's just one example. But when we take it away from that political rhetoric, it's really a matter of reading the curriculum line by line and just saying, is this an accurate reflection of what we want our students to be learning? And that's the hard work that is going on behind the headlines.
You know, you mentioned that you've got 4 children. My kids went through the public school system. Your kids, you know, so you have a firsthand knowledge of exactly what they're being taught.
Yeah.
You know, my 4th grade history book in the 1970s told me that slaves were happy. on the plantation. Not really accurate.
Right.
And so you do have to be concerned that what we're teaching to school children informs their perspective on the world and what they believe that they know about how we all arrived here together now.
Right.
And so working on curriculum is one thing. The other thing that the JCRC is committed to is non-discrimination, which is another thing that is kind of raising, in the school system with the policies, the model policies against transgender students.
Absolutely.
Or the change
Absolutely.
in the policies. And the fact that, again, all these organizations end up coming together because it's not just an assault it's an assault on everybody.
Right, absolutely. An assault on one is an assault on all, and we need to be a space where everybody can feel safe, where they can thrive and learn. Absolutely. And the transgender policy is one that we have been concerned about. We've gotten some questions, well, why shouldn't parents be involved? And I don't think that anyone globally thinks, I should take that back, somebody might think this, but ideally parents would be involved. The problem is we know too many kids where school is their safe place. And to take away the ability for teachers to be a support system is concerning to us.
Yeah, when I start looking at the things that the JCRC is involved in, I'm really impressed. Immigration is another one too.
Yep.
And again, this Northern Virginia region particularly, and
Yep.
Virginia is a big, and you're also in Maryland,
right.
and Greater Washington D.C.
Yeah.
But immigration is another one of these really big issues because we've got children in our schools, and their parents who are undocumented, or the students that are undocumented, in this sense of, this unsettling sense that they're not safe here.
Right. So, I think when it comes to immigration, there's sort of the long-term, we've had a broken immigration system for a long time. And then there's the shorter term of we have real people we're dealing with, and so we come to the issue of immigration from all aspects of our identity, right? In our text, we talk about treating the stranger like ourselves. In our own history, we have been immigrants, and we have been barred from immigration. And so we really come to it from all those perspectives. And so every time we can help immigrants settle, refugees settle, it is an honor. And this is one way where we have worked not only on the issue because it's an important issue, but we've worked on this issue because our synagogues were engaged in it and we were able to support them. So since last August, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, we worked to help our synagogues in the resettlement of refugees coming from Afghanistan. And so we've worked with organizations like Nova Raft here in Virginia to help find supporting families, to help find housing, to get vaccinations so people can enroll in school. At our legislative breakfast, we actually did a collection of sheets and towels for settling families who are settling here. And we've worked actually with the school systems to make sure that they understand the needs of these kids who have been displaced, are now living in our area, and have needs in the schools that are going to be different than the average kid who's here.
Absolutely, and immigration, just like many other things, is so multifaceted. So the experience of Afghan refugees coming here, because of the status that they were given and the way that they arrived here, the groups that stepped up, the places that were made for them, not every immigration community has that.
Correct.
So it's very uneven talking about the immigrant experience today in 2022.
Yeah, and we do a lot of that work in some of these areas where we are not necessarily the experts, we do in coalition. We try to work in coalition as much as possible. We are a member of the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and so we join with them in lobby days on the Hill, and in other ways in protests and signing letters to encourage support for immigrant communities.
I found that was sort of the silver lining of COVID, was the amount of collaboration that was going on among so many organizations, particularly human services organizations, some of whom had never met each other before.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you could be on a screen together. And
you could be. And so Western Fairfax Christian Ministries told a wonderful story about an organization, Inca, I think is the organization, who was looking for flour for Ramadan and couldn't find flour.
Okay.
And they were on a call that had been convened by the Fairfax County government. And so she ended up getting this huge donation of all this flour. And she calls her point of contact and says, I have flour for you. Anyway, long story short, they collaborate together, and they did Meals for Wheels last year together. And I think of that story and how they didn't know each other until this call. And then how one had something the other one needed. It's like a parable of some kind. And I look at the collaborative nature that we were forced into with COVID and realize that going forward, I think all organizations are going to continue to look for the ways to work together, because there is strength in numbers, and there's strengths. And one of the things that your organization does is advocating and educating and communicating with your collaborative organizations and your constituents. And I do think that the activating part is not necessarily something people think about, and yet you touch so many individuals, JCRC, through your as an umbrella organization.
Yeah, we do, and every year we bring a group down to Richmond to lobby directly to the General Assembly, and that's really empowering. With the breakfast that you attended, it's a chance.
It was amazing
to really hear what we do, to meet with legislators who are on the same page. We also have other opportunities for our community to connect with legislators or other elected leaders on particular issues. There have been a few congressmen and delegates and others in the community who have done trips to Israel. So we have a Zoom coming up to sort of hear about their trip, hear what their impressions were, ask questions, things like that. And so and Zoom has allowed us to do more of that.
I know, and you've got a wonderful YouTube channel too, because I went out there and looked. A lot of things that you do go out on YouTube.
Absolutely.
So people can go out there and take a look, and you don't even have to be on the Zoom call, because chances are there's going to be something posted to your YouTube channel.
Absolutely, and actually, one of the things that has gone virtual since COVID that we're keeping this way is our Holocaust commemoration. We had done an annual, we do it on Yom HaShoah, which is the day of remembrance of the Holocaust. And it's been wonderful to move it online and reach so many more people through our channel.
That's great. Well, again, one of the silver linings, if there was one to COVID. We're going to go to a short break. When we come back, we're talking with Vicki Fishman of the JCRC about the advocacy work that they're going to be doing in 2023 in the state level and at the county level here in Northern Virginia. So join us after.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. But if you throw me love, I'll feel it some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my God, yes.
Right?
I mean, like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with Vicki Fishman. She is of the JCRC of Greater Washington, D.C. And we are having a very robust conversation about her work as the Director of Government and Community Relations. So government has many levels to it.
Absolutely.
Federal government, but the state government, and our session is starting on January 11th, and it'll be 45 days. At least we hope it's going to be 45 days. Jury's out on whether it's actually going to be 45 days. And so things like lobby days are one way in which you get people to go down and actually call on the different. So what does that look like when you take your group down there?
We leave very early in the morning. We take a bus from here. It's going to be February 8th this year, and we take a bus down to Richmond. And actually, this is the first time we're doing it in person since COVID started.
Right.
So it's been a couple of years that we've been modifying and doing it online. So we're pretty excited to go back down to Richmond. And in Richmond, we meet up with other Jewish communities from around Virginia. There's a JCRC in Tidewater and in Richmond and in the Peninsula area. So we all come together. We hear from, usually we'll hear from the governor. I don't know if we have his confirmation yet this year, but the Attorney General, the Lieutenant Governor, we hear from them. And then we walk up to the Pocahontas building and we meet with our local legislators or their staff or both. And we talk about what our priorities are. We will have beforehand, educated our community. We have our priorities, which are posted on our website, but they're not yet tied to actual legislation. So between now and the time the session starts, we will tie it to actual legislation. And then we'll track the legislation, and whatever is still alive on February 8th, we will go and talk to our representatives about why it's important to us, how it impacts the community.
And I encourage people to do this. For people, it's easier to do it in a group, and if you've never done it before, it's better to go with a group.
Absolutely.
And you're with a small group of people, and you call on your legislator, or the ones in your area. Usually you have a leave behind or a sheet that has your talking points.
Yep.
And generally you get an opportunity to talk about your personal
connection
with the issue.
Yeah.
And like you said, and eventually there will be bill numbers. So then you'll say, we're talking about HB or SB and the number.
Right.
And then you track it. And sometimes, especially after crossover, for the things that make it to crossover, those phone calls and emails, people think they don't make a difference.
Oh, they make a huge difference. It makes a difference on two sides. One is it makes a difference because our representatives take their job seriously as our representatives. So if the community cares about it, they're at a minimum going to take a second look and try to understand why it's important. It's also empowering for the individuals who go. And I remember lobbying a couple times with people who had not been born in this country, and just walking down the halls of the legislative offices and having this reaction that, where else in the world can you do this, right? And we did have to go through a metal detector, but other than that, it's our house, right? And it is to actually physically go and do that is really empowering and helps you understand, I think, our democracy in a different way. Hopefully everybody listening to this is voting, and this is just one more step that's even more direct.
Absolutely, and it is citizen government. These folks are just people, they're your neighbors, they're people in your community, they stepped up to run for office, they're doing the job, but it is important to hear from your constituents. And in showing up in person is also relationship building.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it takes years to change something.
Yeah.
I work with an organization called Social Action Linking Together out in Reston, who worked, I think John Horsch has worked since 1983 to do something more with the earned income tax credit for poor families, right? And he will say that, but some changes were made that we hope stay in place to do it, step increase.
Yeah.
People can't get discouraged because sometimes it takes a decade
Absolutely. And one of the issues that I've dealt with personally over the last couple of years is solitary confinement.
Yes, the SALT is working on the solitary confinement.
Yeah, absolutely. Work closely with them. And it's an issue that has been around for a long time. Last year there was a bill that it passed the Senate, and in the House it got changed into a study bill. And we really debated as a coalition, why, are we okay with it being a study? There have been so many studies done across the country that tell us pretty clearly, and across the world, frankly, that solitary confinement for an extended period of time is torture, period.
Right.
And it just is. So why do we need another study? But like you said, getting things done, we want it to happen immediately. It doesn't. And people are hurting in the meantime. But that doesn't mean we can stop the progress, right? And so now we've been working for the past year. There's a study that we've been participating in, and talking to legislators about why is this an issue and why is this a bipartisan issue? And it very much is a bipartisan issue, but it's slow progress.
Oh, I know. I worked with Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and
finally
successful.
One that took a really long time.
It took such a long time, and then it suddenly, and there's so many situations where it seems like nothing's happening, nothing is happening. Then all of a sudden something happens, like the governor signs a bill that abolishes the death penalty, right? And so for a lot of people who weren't following or working on this, it probably felt like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Not understanding that so many people had worked for such a long time to get that bill to the governor's desk and signed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when I hope people who are watching really think about the things that you're passionate about, the things that you care about, that matter to your community or your family, and understand there are organizations like JCRC that you can be with them, so you don't have to figure out how to do it by yourself.
Right. Absolutely. And like you mentioned in the last segment, I think our YouTube channel
is great.
And there are so many issues that you can find webinars talking about so many different issues. And we're happy to connect with people if they want to connect with us and learn more about any of them and engage with us on them.
That's great. Well, it's so wonderful that you're working with SALT. We probably have so many mutual friends that we
sure.
have not even explored all the people that we know.
I'm sure.
But solitary confinement is one I know that John is so anxious to get that over the finish line.
Yeah.
But affordable housing is another gigantic issue.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to deal with it. Arlington's talking about the missing middle, and Alexandria's talking about, removing height restrictions for set-asides. Every community is like, what can we do? Because it's a critical issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the governor actually just came out with a policy statement. I can't remember the specific details, but sort of looking long-term. And then we're hoping to also lobby while we're getting there, to fill in the housing trust fund for this at the state level, to make funding available. We, as an organization, just last year we did a pretty comprehensive resolution statement on affordable housing. We really see it as an investment in the community. We have to have housing that teachers can afford to live in the community where they teach, that police officers can afford to live in the community where they patrol. And so there's the workforce aspect of it. There's, we talked earlier about supportive housing. There's the unhoused aspect of it. There's so much involved. There's the immigrant aspect of it. Last year I testified in front of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors about making room for it in the budget. But it's important to also look at it sort of comprehensively. We can't when we have the eviction crisis that was coming through with COVID,
right.
It was a problem that we had already. COVID really just made it more obvious and more urgent. But we also can't have landlords who are stuck holding the bag all by themselves. So it's important that we make investments in the community through the trust fund and things like that.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is zoning. And I think that's one of the things that the governor was hitting on. And again, we don't teach the history of how zoning was used as a weapon, how redlining has brought us the communities that we have right now. Right?
Absolutely.
And so without...
Not just redlining, but also sort of where did the highways go?
Yeah, they bisected a lot of communities of color. That's where, and they destroyed entire communities of color.
Right.
It's not just Tulsa, Oklahoma. There's plenty of examples in Virginia.
Absolutely.
But redlining now, I'm not redlining, but zoning now, as far as housing density, and people, if you don't understand how zoning is used to get particular outcomes for groups that have a particular interest, then it's harder to get people to understand what has to happen for us to solve the affordable housing crisis.
Yeah.
You know, and as you pointed out, going before the Board of Supervisors, if you live in an independent city like I do, going before the City Council, and you know, and a lot of these things are not just ordinances and zoning ordinances, it is a case-by-case project. You know, so I think there's a lot of education to be done in communities about affordable housing and what it is, and again, it's not monolithic. Affordable housing is an enormous spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
From workforce housing to the missing middle to supportive housing, there's just a lot to it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and they're all sort of their own separate issues.
They are.
Yeah.
But in Northern Virginia, it's very acute. And of course, and just transportation also adds to that, simply because housing built around things like the newly opened Silver Line. You know, it's like, great, there's more housing there, but that's not necessarily affordable housing.
Right, right.
You know, so there's just so many levers to trying to figure out housing and how we have got to plan better in Northern Virginia to make sure that people are adequately housed.
Right, right.
You know, and social service organizations, and this is the other thing, you know, being on the board of Bright Paths for so many years, trying to solve the crises that people are having with food insecurity or avoiding eviction really comes down to the cost of housing. People are spending 50% of their income on where they live.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's an important issue, and it really touches on everything. It touches on education. It touches on employment. It touches on you know, all aspects. It touches on crime, right? Like, having a place to call home is really the first step towards thriving in a community. And until you have that, it's hard for the other pieces to come into place.
Absolutely. And I know when you look at the Route 1 corridor stretching from Alexandria all the way down to Richmond, you know, that has been a tough nut to crack, talking about mobile home parks. And that's not just in that area, it's across Virginia and in parts of the country where mobile home parks have been people's homes.
Right.
And now they want to develop them. And where do people go? And that's the problem with the old stock of housing, is it's de facto affordable because it's older.
Right.
Right? And so I think all of these things are difficult for people to look at, and they seem kind of overwhelming when you look at all of the many factors. But a lot of what the initiatives that you have are trying to break it down so that people can figure out one thing to do.
Correct. I think that's right. And we can't let perfect be the
enemy of
the
good.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. You know, and I think on so many of these issues, it's easy to go global and political, but when you get down to the nuts and bolts, it's the details and the nuance that really make a difference.
Go local, in other words. We are talking with Vicki Fishman, and she does government community relations for the JCRC here in the greater Washington area, specifically in Virginia. So please join us after this break. We are going to talk with her further about some of the issues that she is working on.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid. A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close. I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us. But I know it's all going to be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words. These are not my words. These are not my words.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Fire. 'Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting.
This is so humiliating.
Be the boss.
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap.
You were saying.
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
at feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking with Vicki Fishman of the JCRC of Greater Washington. And one of the things we haven't talked about, but it's a very important issue, Vicki, is the ban on abortions that are taking place in states across the United States.
Right.
I think a bill has been filed in Virginia for a total abortion ban, as well as a bill to restrict the time frame in which women have access to abortion care. And one of the things that I heard at the JCRC breakfast is your commitment to making sure that the Jewish community can practice its religious faith, which includes access to this sort of reproductive health care. Explain a little bit more fully what that is.
Sure. So first I will say on our YouTube channel, which you referenced, we have a really extensive conversation about Jewish law and abortion and reproductive health. It's a conversation with 3 local clergy, one from the Reform movement, one from the Conservative movement, and one from the Orthodox movement, talking about Jewish law and abortion. And it is not monolithic, as many things that we've talked about already today, but all aspects of, they all discussed that the woman's life is the primary concern. And it is important that a woman and her faith and her doctor not be interrupted by legislation. Legislators don't need to be part of that discussion. And we really feel that the way that sort of the pro-life conversation happens is through a very limited religious definition of life from a very specific religious movement, a very specific brand of Christianity that is not the way that the Jewish law teaches about how we balance the life of the mother and the potential life of a fetus. And so we really look at this as a religious freedom issue. There are times that a woman religiously would be required to have an abortion, and so we are committed to advocating for it.
And I just think it's a perspective you don't hear as much about, because the loudest voices, regardless of whether they're the majority or the minority, the loudest voices are the ones that get all of the attention in this. And so when you talk about practicing your religious freedom or having religious freedom in this country, you can have religious freedom as long as it's not impeding someone else's practice of religious freedom.
Correct.
And this is one issue where that is clearly the case.
Correct. Absolutely.
So, I mean, I am awaiting what happens next. I think the federal government is going to try really hard. They just, passed legislation to protect same-sex and interracial marriages.
Right.
That's what you have to do, because, they're coming for you here, and you think, well, it doesn't affect me, but eventually they get to you too. That's just, you just wait for it, and they're going to get to you eventually and take something away from you if you don't stop it at the beginning. And so that legislation that passed is important to this country, and I think access to abortion is important to this country, but I don't think that we're there yet, and we'll see what happens. Going forward with this particular issue.
There are, and I think I mentioned this at the breakfast, there are lawsuits around the country where Jewish women are bringing this case that it is a restriction on their religious liberty. So we'll see where those come, or where those go. And we'll also see what happens at the legislative bodies. I think the voting shows in the last election, that
it was
the
an
population,
issue it was an issue people voted on.
People voted on it, and so I'm hopeful that will be heard in Richmond, and these bans are not going to be passed.
So we talked just a little bit about the rise in anti-Semitism here regionally.
Yeah,
it's very disturbing. There have been attacks on synagogues, and when they talk about school safety, they're talking about these days about hardening the environment, and suddenly it's kind of like, should we arm teachers, and should there be metal detectors, and should we reduce the number of doors? All of that to me sounds like we're just creating a prison-like institution for our children to go to school in.
Yeah.
But then when you're looking at religious organizations, it sort of is starting to feel the same way.
Yeah.
If you have armed security guards and metal detectors, and you limit the number of doors, and you have surveillance cameras, it's a terrible place to be in this country right now.
Yeah.
And yet the Jewish community seems to me at greater risk than many other kinds of communities.
Yeah, so this is one of those areas where what seems sort of normal to the Jewish community, I realize every now and then is not normal everywhere else. So it's very common, most synagogues, Jewish community centers, day schools, we have worried about security for my whole life. And so it is not uncommon to have an off-duty police officer outside of a synagogue, to have an investment, a real part of our budget put towards security, towards infrastructure. And it's a yes and, it is keeping doors locked that we would prefer to keep unlocked. It's also training. And it's also, we're getting to know our neighbors, right? So it's all of those things. So, we don't want to hunker down so much that we can't see outside, and that we don't have an open community, but we have to be realistic. And one thing that has happened in Virginia in the last few years, the JCRC, before I was here, we advocated at the state level to create a hate crime security fund. And that has been implemented for the last 2 years. Virginia becomes the 7th or 8th state to provide this kind of funding. And it allows nonprofits who are at risk of being being targeted to partner with local agencies and apply for state funding to harden the security infrastructure, to provide training. And training can mean anything from, stop the bleed, what do you do if there is an incident? And it can also be, how do you train your membership to greet people at the door? Sometimes that can make all the difference. Just having a friendly face, say, hey, I haven't seen you here before, welcome to our community. And that interaction can be a meaningful security step if the people that you have doing that greeting have been trained to understand what their job is.
Do you think, talking about the children that attend synagogue and who also do active shooter drills at their public schools are somehow even more traumatized by the fact that so many places seem so unsafe?
I think that's a real possibility. It's hard to know. I think some of it depends on how the adults around them act. And if we act like it's just something that's good to know, then perhaps that has an impact on reducing hysteria. But no, I think it has a real impact. COVID also has a real impact on all of our mental health. I think feeling that we are always at risk, either just randomly because there are too many guns in our community, or because we are specifically targeted. It's hard to know what that impact. And I have 4 children, as you said, and watching how they each respond. They each have sort of had their own responses. Some, in some ways, empowered. In some ways, concerned. Everyone's gonna react a little differently.
I think so too. And the other thing that my children did not have growing up, because they're all in their 30s, they did not have social media. No Twitter. Really, email was like, they were all in like middle high school before email was a thing. But you look at the disinformation and the hate speech the organizing that goes on in social media, and that's pretty new.
Yeah.
And it just is a whole different level of threat that's also hard to combat because you can't always see it. And even if you can see it, you've got this whole issue of free speech.
And for the kids, it also becomes a debate of sort of what is worth responding to, right? At what point do they remove themselves and just stop paying attention? And at what point do they see perhaps an educational opportunity? That, hey, this is a friend of mine who posted something that they don't necessarily understand what they posted. Maybe I can give them another side or another thing to think about. So that can be powerful, but it can also be exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I mean, I don't know about you, but social media, I could probably live without it. I did for most of my life.
Exactly.
Live without it. I think I could happily live without now.
Yeah.
But it's very hard, and I do think that this is underpinning some of the recent events that have just been awful shootings. Really, you look at the social media and you understand how much of it is going on these platforms.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, it seems to me that part of this focus on safety and grants and trying to help nonprofits and faith-based communities understand what they can do to be safer is important. But culturally, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what else we can do that we're not already doing.
That's the golden question.
Yeah.
Right, and some of that is the work that we are doing all the time, and making connections, building relationships, sharing our story, going into the schools, working in community with others.
And like we said, talking about the Jewish Community Center of Northern Virginia too, a lot of what you do really is for the entire community. I mean, you're the organizing, convening, facilitating organization, and yet the things you do are meant for the benefit of all the people in the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I want people to kind of appreciate that about Jewish organizations in Northern Virginia and in Virginia.
Yeah.
It's always been about not just us, it's about living our faith for the benefit of everyone.
Right. And I think that's actually something that's really central to being Jewish, is all constantly balancing the particular and the universal. Right, that there is something very particular to me about being Jewish, but there's also something very universal, and everything that we do as an organization is that balance. Is we do it in a particularly Jewish way, and we do it particularly for the Jewish community. But we, as a Jewish community, are part of a larger society, and we have we see our role in that community as making the whole community better.
Which is, to me, that is an embodiment of living your faith. One would hope.
Yeah.
That's an embodiment of living your faith. And so I hope that we've left our viewers with this idea that you have so many initiatives and programs out in the community that people may not even be aware are there. So I hope folks look for it. Thank you so much, Vicki,
Thank you.
for
This has
taking
been really
time.
lovely.
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot myself. And for those of you who are at home, this has been Vicki Fishman and your host, Catherine Reed. And I hope you'll join us every Monday at 8 p.m. here on Inside Scoop, which is a production here at Fairfax Public Access.